Yeah, when you can see me. Hello. Testing. Is that working all right? I can hear myself. Yeah.
combined authority for the provision of services.
Thank you, Councillor Bowden. Item 1.3 is the approval of the minutes of the meeting on the 14th of March 2022. We've been asked to confirm that these are an accurate record. If any member wishes to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, can you indicate that now? Councillor Bovington.
Just that I was present.
All right, we can. Don't want to miss you off there. Oh, and just for the record, if you are speaking, you have to press the button in the middle. It turns green eventually. Thank you. Noted. So there's no objections to the accuracy of the minutes. So I will now sign those off. Well, thank you. Thank you. Right. Item 1.4. Does the committee have any comments on the Combined Authority forward plan? I can see no comments there, so we can then move on to item 1.5, which are the public questions. And we have several of these, and they are to be read out by our monitoring officer, and then I will give the answers.
Thank you. The first question is from Ely Cycling Campaign, and it is as follows. The forward plan item 36 shows that this 13th of July meeting is to make a decision to approve an active travel Cambridgeshire proposals. It includes, quote, to include the A10 A142 BP roundabout footbridge Ely. The meeting papers do not include any information on this crossing. In particular, Appendix 1, active travel measures, Cambridgeshire, for item 2.4 has no mention of this crossing. East Cambridgeshire District Council conducted a public survey in 2020, East Cambridgeshire Cycling and Walking Route Strategy. The most often reported be not safe for crossing roads was Witchford BP roundabout Ely. There were 67 mentions out of a total of 135. Cambridgeshire Highways assessed this crossing in its 2016 Transport Strategy for East Cambridgeshire, recommendation E2. This assessment included a defined route for the cycle pedestrian crossing and a costing. The 2009 Ely modelling study identified and tested various transport measures. This project included a significant amount of research into traffic, a crossing for cyclists, pedestrians near the BP garage roundabout was recommended. Our question is, please would officers present an update to the A10 A142 BP roundabout footbridge Ely, which includes the status of plans, including the timeline.
I want to thank the Ely Cycling Campaign for getting in contact with us and asking a very relevant question. I would hopefully, I'll move on to my response, but to reassure them that the Combined Authority remains committed to the development and implementation of the A10 A142 BP roundabout footbridge in Ely. This scheme has overwhelming community support, and it is something that I would like to see delivered at the earliest opportunity. So what we have is currently work being progressed by the County Council on behalf of the Combined Authority. The BP Roundabout NMU Project Board met on the 1st of June 2022 to discuss next steps in progressing a scheme to provide enhanced NMU permeability at the A10 A142 BP roundabout. It was agreed at this meeting that a high-level option analysis would first be carried out through the summer, after which we will seek member comment and work up the design detail. In parallel, the Combined Authority and the County Council, we will identify potential additional funding sources, including funding through the Transforming Cities Fund. The high-level programme summary is as follows. Option assessment, July to August 2022. August to September, project board work up to high-level options into discussion paper, including provisional costings. This will be followed by due consideration of the appropriate assessment criteria. In summary, hopefully this will give you a feeling for the enhanced level of cooperation between the Combined Authority and the County Council And once we have a costed preferred design, we can take it through a proportional appraisal and, subject to sufficient funds being in place, proceed to delivery. And I would like to see that, as I say, at the earliest opportunity. The next question.
Thank you, Mayor. Question 2 is from Rosalind Lund, Arbury Road East Residents Association. Agenda 2.6, Appendix 1, shows 15 schemes being considered by the GCP, Greater Cambridge Partnership, following consultation on the Cambridge Network Hierarchy Review in summer 22, including a modal filter for Arbury Road, East End. Does this decision on funding affect the scheme, and when can we expect work on this to start?
Thank you again to Rosalind Lund from the Arbury Road East Residents Association. So much of the funding will go towards the 17 projects that are being delivered by Cambridgeshire County Council, with a small element earmarked for the development of the GCP projects. The current GCP consultation on the network hierarchy review has put forward some initial ideas on what a future network hierarchy could look like, based on some draft operational principles and new draft street categories. These initial ideas suggest that Arbury Road could be designated as an area access street, which could only facilitate through movements between Milton Road and Histon Road for buses and cyclists. Currently, the GCP are not considering any specifics on where any modal filters would be located to control through movements, and this would be subject to further public consultation. The network hierarchy consultation is due to close on the 18th of July. The GCP Executive Board and Cambridgeshire County Council's Transport Committee will consider the feedback and will decide next steps, winter 22 to 23. This will then influence the timescales for the Arbury Road project. Thank you again for your question. And there's a final third question from the residents of Needingworth Road in St Ives.
Not quite the final question. There is one after that. However, the residents from Needingworth Road, Democratic Services received 9 questions from members of the public regarding the A141 St Ives Improvements Report, Agenda Item 2.8. The questions are broadly similar in scope, relating to issues specifically concerning Needingworth Road St Ives. Residents highlight key concerns to be rat running, the need for a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit, the need for speed reduction control measures, the proposed no right turn onto St Audrey's Lane, a desire for a no right turn onto Needingworth Road from St Audrey's Lane, funding commitments for the proposed schemes, and HGVs using Needingworth Road, including the associated noise, vibration and safety impacts. Residents draw attention to the importance of lessening the impact of traffic volumes on an already deteriorating road surface, and the essential provision of safe access, especially for children, to schools and facilities located along Needingworth Road, such as the mosque, church and nursery. Residents also stress the importance of encouraging active travel, reducing interruptions to the flow of traffic on main routes and the bypass caused by rat running, and improving the environment in terms of noise, air quality and safety for residents by reducing high volumes of often slow-moving traffic during the morning rush hour. The full text of the questions will be published on the committee's page on the web.
Thank you. So we'll move on to the fourth question, which I think is from Linda Worth on behalf of the British Horse Society. You want to read it out?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and full written response will be provided to the residents of Needingworth Road.
Okay.
Linda's question on behalf of the British Horse Society. The committee is being asked to approve a number of projects to improve cycling safety through the use of cycle lanes, some of which are protected by flexible traffic posts. The recent changes to the highway code and road user hierarchy both identify equestrians as equally vulnerable road users as cyclists. The highway code states that cyclists should not pass a horse on their left. The simple and cost-effective solution is the use of inclusive signage on cycle provision to enable equestrians to share the safe space which these schemes are delivering. Please can the committee endorse this as policy for Cambridgeshire Peterborough to provide equal protection for those groups identified by the road user hierarchy as being equally vulnerable road users. Furthermore, at item 52, there is reference to consider proposals for the development of active travel schemes in Cambridgeshire and make recommendations to the Combined Authority Board to include the A10, A142 BP roundabout footbridge Ely. East Cambridgeshire District Council undertook an Ely modelling project in 2009 that identified a general crossing along the line of St John's Road, which is byway PROW 76/39. There is a need and a huge opportunity for better NMU network provision in this area, and any safe crossing of the A10 needs to take into account all vulnerable road users, including equestrians, particularly if this has the potential link to a byway. Please can the committee require all stakeholders given the opportunity to engage with this project prior to decisions being made?
And to come to the response. So the County Council are currently working on an active travel strategy that will be a child document to the local transport and connectivity plan. Due consideration will be given within this policy to emergent national policies such as LTN 120 and the road user hierarchy. The final document will ensure consistency between partner organisations in the application of the policy. Your feedback will be fed into the project team. Now, to go specifically in relation to the A10 A142 BP roundabout, footbridge and Ely, as stated previously, the combined authority remains absolutely committed to the development and implementation of the A10 A142 BP roundabout, footbridge and Ely. As the scheme is developed, due consideration will be given to all modes, with the final scheme design adhering to national and local policy. Hopefully that will give you some reassurance, and thank you again for your question. We will now move on to part two, which is about delivery. And as chair, I would like, in 2.1 is the Transforming Cities Fund. And so I'm now going to ask Tim Bellamy, the interim head of transport, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So with regard to the Transforming Cities Fund, the paper has been outlined around how we wish to take this forward. So the Transforming Cities Fund is a capital grant transport fund that was awarded to the combined authority with the aim to increase access to jobs, looking at low carbon and sustainable mode, also looking to address pollution and development. The combined authority was in receipt of £95 million, and the report was given to board in March around track, whether we're on track, etc., with the spend to date, but also the forecast for the next financial year. Having reviewed our forecast, we've been looking to accelerate some of the schemes that are in the programme and take those forward and at a timely manner, and actually therefore put more funding into those. However, even with those schemes, there will be likely to be a significant underspend, and therefore a revised programme will be required to fulfil the package of work, both the criteria itself, but also make sure the funding is spent, etc. The DFT have requested that there is commitment from ourselves, both the committee and also the board, to start those schemes within this financial year. There's no legal connotation around letters, etc. around that has to all be spent this year. There just needs to be a commitment to spend it to start that with spade in the ground. We need the funding itself. Having had conversation with central government, they do not want us to return the underspend. They want it spent in the local area, and therefore we, as a combined authority, need to understand the quantum of that underspend and how that will be spent going forward. So, with that in mind, myself and the team are working with county council colleagues, city council, and also GCP to identify a number of schemes where capital swaps or capital replacement schemes can be brought forward, and that needs to be assessed against the criteria of the Transforming City Fund to make sure that we're continuing to meet the needs of the project and also the fund itself, making sure it meets the local transport plan and local transport connectivity plan objectives. And most importantly, are the two other parts are they're deliverable, and we've got commitment to them being deliverable, and there is equity across the region. So actually, it's not just focused in one area. We actually revise and look to make sure that we spend the fund that we have. The reason why the detail around the actual underspend is not in the paper, because we continue to, I've been pressing with my project managers, but also county and city colleagues around what the actual spend is for this year. But we all have an identified list of schemes, and we are going through the sifting process around what the quantum of that underspend may be, and whether they're deliverable, and ultimately that will come back through the leader strategy and also go to board for sign off around what are the schemes we take forward. So the recommendations are to note the current position with regard to delivery of the scheme, agree for a revised programme that will be outlined in due course, and then there is an amendment to item C, which is it should read, delegate responsibility to the interim head of transport in consultation with the chief finance officer and the monitoring officer to finalise the potential replacement capital schemes for agreement by leaders. So that concludes my report. I'm happy to take questions.
Yep. Thank you, Tim. So would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question, please raise a hand. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. I think this will be a fairly easy question for Tim to answer, since we had a very short conversation just before this meeting started. But for the record, I wonder if confirmation can be given that, especially with a view to looking for oven-ready projects, that consideration will be given in discussions taking place between Tim and Fenland District Council officers to progressing the Wisbech Access Study, where money was taken away from the Wisbech Access Study after we had got it up to an oven-ready position. The consideration will be given also to the March Junctions project, which also didn't get the funding which was expected and is available to be moved forward in this year. And if it qualifies under the TCF rules, and I don't know if it does, although it is capital, that consideration be given to the Whittlesea Southern Access Relief Road Stage 1 report, which is something which the Mayor will recall some 85% of the responses to his budget consultation this year favoured the combined authority to go ahead with. Thank you very much.
Tim?
Yep. We'll just regard the Wisbech Access and the March Junction. They are within the programme for, I think, as I confirmed previously, they are within the programme for accelerated delivery. So that will be part of the scheme, and we will need to take away the Whittlesea Relief Road report and actually understand, one, whether it qualifies due to capital expenditure, and then also whether we can put that within the prioritised list of schemes. But I can get back to you regarding the Whittlesea in due course.
There were other hands before. Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Mayor. So whilst I wouldn't totally disagree with what Chris has requested, and indeed it came up many times before for the Wisbech Access Strategy, I just want to make a general point that when we're looking at the plan, when the County Council is looking at the plan in conjunction with the Combined Authority, the LTCP, the key thing here, I think, is, and a lot of residents think, is connectivity. We see, certainly in places like Fenland, certain places in South Cambridgeshire, this whole theme of connectivity is really, really important. And Tim, I think it's an opportunity with the work you're doing at the moment to just bear that in mind again.
I'm going to let Tim come back.
I fully agree with the connectivity. It's a key component part of the LTCP, and will be part of the criteria for when we look at the additional schemes. But I just wanted to add a point of clarity. The Wisbech Access and the March scheme were in the original Transforming City Fund programme, so that is why they'll be given priority in the first instance, and then we will look to spend the remaining money, and connectivity will be one of those criteria.
Councillor Schuyler.
Thank you. Obviously, the County Highways has an interest in this, and there is no lack of schemes. We are currently working through a number. I want to mention the quality of work, the officer time going into this, and so I wonder, even schemes that are not subsequently being picked up at this stage, could we retain them for future consideration, some sort of a list, just to honour the work that is currently going on at the moment? Thank you.
Tim, to come back.
Yep, just on that. So I think the work that's been put in shouldn't be forgotten. Is the work that we're working collaboratively with city and county colleagues. The scheme list I believe that they will form the pipeline. They're actually looking at other funding opportunities. So those schemes that aren't taken forward, I think, as you say, it should be maintained. Actually, these are schemes ready to go, and we will seek out additional funding opportunities, whether that's central government or other options going forward. So they are packages, and they are packaged up. So there are active travel, sustainable travel. There are different focus points that we can actually go and bid for funding in due course.
Any more comments? Okay. Well, I'll just sort of I'll just wrap up. I have a sense that we're recognising there's a challenge here, but we have challenges also present opportunities, and it's for all of the representative councils to ensure that they're working closely with the combined authority, and it's good, obviously, representation, be it from South Cambs, but particularly working with the county council and Peterborough City Council. We can deliver things if we work together. So let's move towards that. And on that hopefully positive note, I would just want to say, can I check, is there any other member who want to speak? And if not, I will move to the recommendations. The recommendations are to note the current position in relation to the delivery of the TCF schemes programmed for 2022 to 23, to B, agree to the revision to the programme and the process for this outlined within the paper, and the slight change here is to make sure that you understand, to C, delegate responsibility to the interim head of transport in consultation with the chief finance officer and the monitoring officer to finalise the potential replacement capital schemes (brackets packages) for agreement by leaders. Those in favour? It's a unanimous vote. Okay, in that case, thank you for that. It means we can now move on to item 2.2, which is on pages 57 to 60, and this is about the local bus service assessment framework. And Tim is going to remain and present this report as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, members. There is a confidential appendix that came with this. I assume you've all been in receipt of that. So, with regard to the local bus service assessment framework, we understand that bus operators are under considerable pressure, financial pressures. That's borne about by a number of reasons. One is that due to the removal of the bus recovery grant from central government, which will kick in October. There's also the impact with regard to drivers, but also fuel costs, etc. So costs are increasing significantly for operators across our region. Therefore, there's likely to be a funding request for ourselves to maintain services across our region. Having had conversations with all of our operators, the majority of our operators, there's a need for support from ourselves to maintain services. The quantum of those of the actual cuts are continuing to be discussed and challenged by our officers and also our operators. But ultimately, there is a number of steps to go through in this. The Mayor has written to the Secretary of State for Transport to outline the adverse impact of the removal of the bus recovery grant. We continue to challenge operators both at CEO level, but also at officer level around the impact and whether there are any innovative ways to fund or continue support for the routes. But ultimately, if the request comes that the request for funding exceeds the money that is available from the combined authority, there will be a need for a criteria to go through a clear, transparent process to outline, to say these are the ones that we can support and these are the ones we unfortunately can't. We don't want to be in that position, but that may well be where we are. So the criteria is being developed as we speak. So the team are currently taking that forward. They are looking at best practice from other parts of the country and seeing whether they can learn any lessons, and especially places like west of England, which have very similar issues. They have significant towns and cities, market towns, but also our rural areas, and because we don't want to adversely impact on any members of our region. And so we continue to work with County Council, City Council and GCP to develop that criteria. with that criteria being agreed and then put into practice if necessary in due course, but the criteria will be going to the board in August to take that forward. So the recommendations are to provide feedback on the need for the assessment framework and the purpose of it, and agree for officers to continue to finalise an appropriate assessment framework for subsequent approval by board members in due course.
Thank you, Tim. So would any members of the committee wishing to ask a question raise a hand? Okay, Councillor Bowden to start with.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. It's very regrettable that we're in the position that we are in. The monies given out under the current arrangements which were announced in May and the ones which were announced just before that as part of the same overall package didn't cover London, but did cover the rest of England, and almost 2/3 of the population of the country were covered by those announcements. And according to the government, and I think according to the letter we received from the Department for Transport, it was those bids which were deemed not to be ambitious enough which ended up with no funding. And I fear, I could be wrong about this, but we ended up being the only mayoral combined authority in the country not to receive any funding under that. We are, however, where we are with this, and I think that Tim is entirely correct that eventually some criteria, some objective criteria are going to be used in assisting to make a determination as to how the limited funding which is available is going to be able to be allocated. I would ask, in the interests of fairness, that to the extent that you look at numerical value in terms of cost effectiveness, that rather than looking at the cost per passenger journey, that we look at the cost per passenger journey per mile. If we fail to do that, then basically all of us who are in the areas outside the cities are going to get nothing whatsoever. For us, for our residents, the journeys that they take tend to be much, much longer than the ones which are taken within the cities themselves. We're talking about journeys which could well be half an hour, 3/4 of an hour journeys even. And those ones just will not manage to score heavily at all if we're just talking about the subsidy which is required per passenger journey. And when, even after having that objective criteria based on cost, I think we then need to look take a wider look at this and give consideration to what the actual impact is, because there's an enormous difference between a bus service within a city being every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes and a bus service in a more rural area being a few times a day or not at all. So I'd ask for some subjectivity to be brought into this, as well as the objectivity of numbers, which obviously will be part of what Tim was saying and which are where the criteria come in. Thank you, Mayor.
Tim, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, so just with regard to the first point made, Councillor Bowden, we need to make sure that with regard to BSIP, which I think you're referring to, we need to make sure that the two are not, they're inextricably linked, but ultimately the different types of funding. So ultimately the BSIP and the bus strategy, we are revising that. We are still awaiting feedback on the detail behind the reason why we weren't successful, and we have pressed central government on that. But we are revising the BSIP, and we are looking to develop the bus strategy to come to this committee in autumn to winter to go through this process, and then ultimately through board. And then with regard to the objectives and the criteria, I just noted down that I think there is a need. Yes, there is a need for numbers, etc., but there is also a need to map that across social exclusion and accessibility across. There needs to be accessibility mapping exercise in this, because if it's driven by numbers, then I don't think we'll get the answer that we need. So actually, there is a layer of accessibility, opportunities, etc., and that needs to be built into the criteria.
I'd like to thank you, Tim, for mentioning social exclusion and the importance. I know that's what you were highlighting, Chris, but we are a combined authority that are keen to reduce inequality and social exclusion, or indeed exclusion from education and employment opportunities wherever you live, need to be taken in consideration. Buses can be a lifeline. I'm going to go to Lara. Sorry, Councillor Davenport-Ray.
Thank you. I share some of these concerns about rural residents, and so I'd be very interested to see in these studies how we decide to account for loss of service, especially in rural areas. And not only does that touch upon social exclusivity and cost, but also about the drive towards active travel. If we look at rural residents, their ability to take part in active travel is even less than those in more urban areas. And so if their one means of public transportation, whether it be a bus, is removed, that's even bigger for rural areas than for urban. But in this report, I would also, I'm quite happy to see the mayor's drive to engage with central government on this issue, because I can see that is necessary, and I'm happy to see the commitment in this report on that. Thank you.
Your thanks are welcomed. Councillor Schuyler and then to Councillor Bovington.
The subsidy removal is going to cause huge disruption, actually, before we get passenger numbers back up. What I would like to ask is, there's several aspects to this, and part of Cambridgeshire where we have the GCP, the GCP is pushing forward on supporting bus services in that area, but there'll clearly be a gap between when those sort of things come on and when we see this removal. Is there any possibility to bridge that gap? The second question is, clearly buses are key to a lot of what we want to do. And when is the next opportunity where we might be looking at funding from central government? That, how long that goes. The third part of it is, I wonder if we could remember, in terms of rural isolation, education transport. The Cambridgeshire County Council spends an enormous amount getting children to school in places where actually we're talking about transport poverty in general. And when we spend £17,000 a year getting one person to school via taxi, that money might be better spent on subsidising local bus services. So I wonder if we can keep that somehow into the equation. Thank you.
I'll let Tim come back on. There's quite a few questions there. But,
Yeah. So just regard to GCP, so they are part of the work that's going to be taken forward with the criteria. So understanding their requirement, but we also mustn't forget that there are some of the rural areas as well. So we just it getting that balance right. So pump priming thing for GCP, but ultimately the lifeline type issue for some of our rural areas. So part of it's quite a difficult job for the team to develop an appropriate criteria. But actually, in order to do that, we will continue to work with county, city, GCP colleagues, but also our constituent councils to actually make sure that we have something that allows us to make those difficult decisions. But we do understand that GCP have a role, but other areas do too. With regard to central funding, I think part of the letter that got sent from Nick was asking for a meeting with the Secretary of State, so to understand, to provide our positioning from the region, but also then to say what level of support will we get going forward, and just to ask those questions. And then with regard to education, I think that's definitely a point. It got raised by one of the operators that we spoke to around how do we organise the education transport better, so actually it helps us to offset, and that helps them too. So I definitely think the education transport is in this mix around, before we even get to the assessment criteria, how do we do things better in the first place?
I was going to go with Councillor Bovington, then I'll come to Councillor MacDonald, and then Councillor Bovington.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Shayler and Councillor Bowden have taken 3 of my 4 questions. Thanks, Tim. The only one that's remaining, actually, is you mentioned the criteria will be decided in due course. Are you able to elaborate more on a timescale or estimated timescale on that?
Yes, so we're looking to take an update to the July board, but actually the actual criteria itself we're looking to table at the Leaders Strategy meeting in the 10th of August, and then subsequently to be agreed at the August board, and therefore allows the criteria to hit the ground hit the ground running. So because ultimately the reason why it's important to get it through that process is because if you work back from October, that 70 days notice needs to be given by operators to deregister. That's the end of July, but ultimately, having spoken to operators, that's only starts the process. So it allows us to then agree the position, and then if we need to, challenge the amount of money required, and therefore put it into place in September.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thanks, Mayor. 2 points I wanted to make is that when I heard that there was a withholding or reduction of the subsidy, given that everybody's experiencing a cost of living crisis, and we need effective buses and connectivity at the moment more than perhaps any time in the last 20 years. So I hope Chris and others can really help us, I'm sure he will, in terms of trying to influence the government and say, look, this has serious issues. People now would have to consider using their car instead of bus transportation potentially, and it's really a worrying sign. And the other practical point is at the moment that you may not be aware that, so one of my bus companies in South Cambridgeshire cannot get licenses for the drivers they've recruited because of the hold-ups at the DVLA. So they have 2 retiring drivers and have made job offers to 3 drivers and are still waiting after 3 months to get new licenses for them. So I don't know what we can do, maybe through yourself, Mayor, or others to try and speed this up. It's a really serious issue.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Councillor MacDonald, but I think if I can bring in Tim with regard to the second point, training of bus drivers might be able to help.
I would just firstly touch on the first point because I realised that I didn't clarify the position well in my introduction. With regard to cost of living crisis and the government issue, this funding issue that we're talking about is just until the end of this financial year, and it's likely then to continue into subsequent financial years, which is why we'll need the criteria in place, because this will raise its head at some point going forward. And then with regard to the licensing for drivers, I'm happy to take that away and understand how we can have an active role in that going forward. I think there is a role for us in that discussion, but ultimately I'm happy to go away and then feedback in due course.
And we already do some of this stuff in the adult education budget with HGV drivers, but I'll certainly take that away, and it will be it's a point well made. And then again, an example within our combined authority where we're trying to make sure that different directorates are working closely, recognising there's a symbiosis to get benefit for all. Councillor Thornborough.
Hello. Yep. Some of my questions have been answered, and I'd just like to repeat that thanks for writing to the government, and please continue to press this issue with them. In Cambridge, we have a dialer ride, which is for minibus. It's like a minibus service, and that's actually very successful. And I think with the pressure on the bus, the stagecoach and the buses, there's going to be more use of dialer ride. And I think in the past, the Combined Authority have offered funding for electric minibuses, and I think they didn't manage to secure them at the time, but I think your support for dialer ride has been really appreciated by them. And I do know that they want to extend further to more areas in South Cambs and to Ely. And appreciate, and I think that the support of dialer ride while the other buses are under pressure is a good thing to keep working on. Thank you.
I certainly am supportive of demand response transport, but I will give the expert in the room a more opportunity to speak loud about that, and would welcome yourself or indeed constituents writing to us to inform us of what they have as proposals. We're always looking for innovation and enthusiasm for improved bus services. Over to you, Tim.
So just to echo Nick's point, the more ideas we come into the mix, the better. I think the demand responsive transport in West Huntingdonshire, we are learning lessons from. It's definitely a positive, but actually, how do we roll that out? And what is the next parcel to do, area to do? Because there are arguments that you extend that thing into the neighbouring region, or do you go and do a completely different area and take that forward? And that is some of the work that we're trying to do for our bus strategy, to understand that not one size fits all. So there's a role for demand responsive transport. There's a role for traditional services. There's the GCP work, etc. Knitting that all into one strategy and actually taking that forward is key. And actually, it's not then. What concerns me, it always concerns me around when you talk about modal strategies. When you do a bus strategy, you go actually. It should really then think about what the interaction with active travel and then interacting with maybe freight, and there's lots of different parts. So that's partly what the LTP tried to do, but then the bus strategy is how we then deliver that element of our programme, and ultimately we just need the integration and working out what are the right things in the right areas.
Thank you, Tim. Councillor Davenport Ray, you wanted to come back.
As we've brought up the topic of demand responsive transport, so in Huntingdonshire, we've had the Ting trial, and I noticed from previous minutes of this committee that when the trial was extended, I guess it would be extended into August 2022, the objective was to track whether that project had been cost neutral or profiting. And I do see demand responsive transport as an answer to some of the questions we have in general. So I'm curious when this committee might receive feedback on that extension of the trial, the cost effectiveness of it. And I think I would prefer that to happen sooner rather than later, as the trial ends in August 2022. And I know that from feedback from residents of Huntingdonshire, especially rural communities, it has been a real changer in their modes of transport and getting to essential services like hospital appointments from rural villages. So I'd really like to see that feedback sooner rather than later.
Tim, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah. So with regard to the actual timing, that I can ask Oliver Harris, who's our bus strategy manager, to come back to you around when those reports are due, and actually when we can start seeing initial views. And the other part of that is similar to what we were saying earlier with the criteria, is actually we should be also looking at not just the numbers, it's also about getting the feedback around how this has changed people's lives and actually how things can be improved and lessons learned. So there need to be a qualitative and a quantitative response to this. So the quantitative bit, I think we can, that in progress, and it's quite straightforward to provide. The qualitative bit, we probably need to take away and develop that going forward.
I can see one final comment maybe from Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. I hope you would agree that this has been quite an interesting and constructive debate, and I think it's been very interesting, the different points which have been raised and the very positive answers which have been given by Tim. I was struck by the comment from Councillor Shaler, and I was rather surprised by the answer from Tim about school transport and the possibility of us looking at that being in some way integrated in the work which is done. It only makes sense to do that, of course. Unfortunately, we've actually gone backwards in that in the last 12 months rather than forwards, because last September, the County Council made a decision not to permit the payment of fares by individuals who don't qualify for statutory transport to schools, even where there is the room on the buses which are provided for them to travel, forcing more people to be driven to school rather than use the bus which is going to the school. So if anything can be done by Tim to try and persuade the county, I'll give you one specific place as an example for you to use, and that is the village of Coates, and for children who are travelling to the Sir Harry Smith's College in Whittlesea. They don't qualify for statutory transport based on distance, and what they used to do was to be able to use the buses which did run for those who did qualify and to pay for that. That stopped in September. That was definitely a retrograde step, and if you could look at that and similar things when you're looking at the possible integration, I'd be very grateful. And I agree with Councillor MacDonald, some of us are maybe in a slightly stronger position than others to push forward the interests of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough when it comes to future subsidies and future grants as far as buses are concerned. We've got to have something which is ambitious. When I compare what was put in by Cornwall, for example, very similar sort of size in terms of population to us, when I look at that, the bid that they put in successfully and compare it with ours, there were a million miles different. So we really have to get our act together in future when we are putting bids in. It really is important. I would just ask that we are careful when putting in future bids, and also in this report which is going to come forward so far as the buses are concerned, that we completely separate out the provision of financial support for bus services from the type of fuel which is used for those buses. where we are talking about investment to be made on fuel, that really is an environmental matter rather than being a bus transport matter. And separating out the two, I think, is really important, because the danger is we actually end up swallowing an enormous amount of money which is meant for transport and no actual additional transport is provided. And I'll be talking more about that in a future agenda item about which fuel it should be. But I really think that that's an important principle. And finally, the comment which was made about demand-responsive transport, undoubtedly it is the future. Undoubtedly it is the way we will need to go. I think that we're not now in a very easy position to push it forwards, and I don't want any perceived failure that there may be in what is being experimented on now to stop the basic principle of being supported, because it is the way to move forwards. You know, Mayor, maybe some of the members of this committee aren't aware of it, but you know that I have been quite vocal in advocating that there should be no need for private transport before the year 2050, well before the year 2050, based on what can be provided publicly. And I could go into that at a great deal of length. But demand-responsive transport is absolutely key to that. And I believe that we really cannot give up on that just because it is difficult at the moment. But it is going to be far, far more efficient in 5 or 10 years' time than it is now.
Thank you, Councillor Bodo. I'm conscious Councillor Sereste, you haven't spoken and is welcome to the meeting. Do you want to add anything to the debate here from a point of view of Peterborough?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if you can hear me, but
We can hear you.
This is not lighting up. I'm sorry I was late, by the way. I couldn't find anywhere to park a car. Would have been great if I'd have come here by the bus, but there you go. I don't particularly want to speak on this particular item, but there are two pretty serious issues which are at some point I'd like to discuss with this body. Is why are we not talking about trains? And it may be that it's not within our remit, which is fair enough, but I used to be the transport lead on the East of England Development Agency and got some of the modifications that have been made to the train service across our region implemented, and actually got a lot of money out of the EU for doing it. It seems to me that if we look across our Cambridgeshire, if we had a decent link that was quick, efficient, and to the centre of both major cities, we would make a huge difference to the way people think about transport and actually the transport that they use. I only give an example with Peterborough to London and Cambridge to London. I'm sure none of us drive into London if we can possibly avoid it, and we all use the transport because it's all very, very good. So and again, somebody will tell me, is it outside of our remit to look at bus services? If it's not, why we're not looking at it? And when do we start doing that? The other thing that I wanted to say was, it's very difficult to hold a crystal ball and decide what's going to happen tomorrow. And I completely agree with my colleague, whose name I don't know, but 20 years' time, there will be no need for us to own cars. In fact, we probably don't need to own cars now. We've just got to take the next step. So we've got to be conscious of that. Will we need buses? Probably not even that. Tesla have designed a car that drives itself. It doesn't even need a driver. Now, there's been a few issues, like people getting killed, which is not a really good idea. But I'm sure that even that's going to get ironed out. And when they get that right, and you can call Uber, and Uber will send you a car, not even a driver, and pick you up from home, drop you off wherever it is you want to go, who's going to need a bus? And, who's going to need their own car? We will all for some while, want to have our own cars, I'm sure. But eventually we'll all learn that actually it's a lot simpler to have something like that, at least locally, if we don't want to do 500 miles in a vehicle. And the other thing that's around the corner, which I think is quite interesting, is hydrogen. And, are we looking at the potential for hydrogen? Because if we can't buy electric vehicles, and even if we want to buy whatever this new diesel, high quality, sustainable diesel is called, I think HMO or something, I don't know, whatever it is. It is more expensive. It does work, but it's environmentally more friendly. So why are we not looking at hydrogen?
I'll come in there because the next item on the agenda is the East Anglian Alternative Fuel Strategy.
Fantastic.
So I think we might be looking at that. But I was going to move on, if that's okay. Councillor. Thank you for that contribution.
I need to press it again.
Yeah, you're on.
It's difficult to see what it's on. Just very quickly about the on-demand trial, I'm also interested in the results, and I wonder if I could ask that similar trials, I was recently at a conference about excellence in passenger transport, and there are similar trials going on in different parts of the country, including in Bedfordshire. And so I wonder if we could include the data from those trials when this comes back to this committee. It might be quite informative. Thank you.
I assume if they will give it to us, but I will let Tim come back on that.
Yeah, just to cover a couple of points. So with regard to that data, one, there is a point around whether that's commercially viable, etc., and how we source that data, and also making sure that it's comparable. If it is an answer both yes to both of those, then it needs to be part of the report to allow us to understand the differences and also the benefit. One quick answer regarding trains and rail while we're there, before we close down this, is yes. So yes, rail is a key part of our portfolio. We obviously don't do necessarily delivery of some of that, so that works through train operators and network rail. But we do have conversations around the simple things around timetabling, but we have developed schemes such as Surham Station and Mart Station. But we are continuing to work with subnational transport bodies around the Ely Air capacity, East Rail, Snellwell Loop. So yes, they are part of our portfolio and remit, but at this stage there was not a decision to be made around those at this stage, and that's why it's not on this agenda. But there may well be subsequent opportunities in going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Seresta, yeah?
Thank you very much. I fly around Europe, well, used to, but I also start again quite often. But if you want to get a plane from Stansted Airport at 6:15 in the morning, your only option is to drive. Only option. That means all of those people, EasyJet, Ryanair, Jet2, whatever, that are flying from 5 o'clock till about 7:30 in the morning, who need to get to Stansted Airport all through our county, drive. And so it's something that somebody should be looking at.
And it's something that's part of the LTCP consultation. I'm going to move on to the recommendations for this report. I apologise for a little delay, but I'm grateful for the contributions you've all made. The Transport and Infrastructure Committee is invited to recommend the Combined Authority Board to A, provide feedback on the need for and purpose of the local bus service assessment framework, and B, to agree for officers to continue, finalise an appropriate assessment framework for subsequent approval by the Combined Authority Board members. Those in favour? Those in favour? Councillor Seresta? Okay. Unanimous? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to 2.3. Item 2.3 is the East Anglian Alternative Fuels Study. And so could I now ask Emma White, Transport Programme Manager, to introduce this report?
Morning, everyone. The committee is recommended to note the progress on the East Anglian Alternative Fuel Strategy and approve a 6-week public consultation commencing in October 2022. This report provides an update on the East Anglian Alternative Fuel Strategy. This was undertaken with Element Energy in partnership with the Norfolk and Suffolk LEP. The transport sector accounts for the highest share of national CO2 emissions and therefore will need to undergo deep transformation to meet the UK's 2050 net zero target. The CPCA and the New Anglia LEP have undertaken the work to allow for a framework to establish through which informed action can be made to mitigate and adapt to climate change. The work was undertaken in 2 phases. Phase 1 reviewed the current situation, looked at alternative fuels uptake, explored opportunities and actions, and had stakeholder engagement. And then Stage 2 created an action plan. In summary, the review of the current situation of transport policy was at national, regional and local level. All county councils and most local authorities have set net zero dates by 2050 at the latest, with many being as soon as 2030. Transport contributes towards 33% of emissions in the region and 95%. With regards to green gas infrastructure, there are very limited existing refuelling options for biomethane in the region and no current hydrogen refuelling stations. Overall, the opportunities include reducing demand and shifting to sustainable modes, and actions include accelerating alternative fuels uptake. A number of stakeholder engagement exercises are undertaken with the private and public sector throughout the development of this study. Phase 2 is the action plan, using all the information collected in Phase 1. A long list was refined based on cost, deliverability, co-benefits, CO2 impact, with further input from local stakeholders. And this has consequently been developed into an action plan, including 3 actions. Number 1, expand electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Number 2, to encourage AV take-up. And 3, to deliver modal shift and encourage behavioural change. We acknowledge that there's a difference between zero emissions, net zero and carbon neutral. We're working with experts to outline the differences between constituent council positions, and this will be done ahead of the consultation. The key next step is to socialise the East Anglian Alternative Fuel Strategy more widely through a public consultation. Following the public consultation, the strategy will be subjected to due governance and will form a key component of the local transport and connectivity plans policy document suite. Finally, the Combined Authority are working on an electric vehicle implementation working group to develop a way forward for the East Anglian Alternative Fuel Strategy to gear up for funding of the government's local electric vehicle infrastructure levy scheme, which is due out later this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Members of the committee wanted to ask a question. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor. You will appreciate I only had very short notice for this meeting because of the illness, unfortunately, of Councillor Seaton. So I looked at this agenda item and saw an East Anglian alternative fuel strategy. So I opened it up with the solid expectation that I would find nothing in it which I liked, and I would have a lot of negative things to say about it. And I was surprisingly pleased by the even-handed and objective approach that there largely is within this report. So I'm not going to try and tear it to pieces. However, I have to say that there are some things which we need to be realistic about. The first is that we are not going to be able to have shifts of the form that are talked about here in terms of fuel as easily in more rural areas as in more urban areas. And this just doesn't seem to be recognised. And we have to accept that. We have to build that in to the plans that we've got. It just isn't going to happen so easily for a whole host of different reasons. The second thing is that I fear that, as I say, this was much more even-handed than I expected, but there is a real problem with this rush for electric. First of all, if we were to really rush for electric, really fast indeed, we wouldn't actually have the capability of coping with the demand that there would be. The national grid would actually fail in terms of doing that quickly. We've got serious issues with that, and those aren't often fully recognised. But what some of the individuals around this table, not all, I have to say, but some of the individuals around this table will remember the old clash there was between VHS and Betamax when they were competing with each other as methods of recording and of having films. And VHS came out first and got some headway. Betamax was by far and away the better solution technically, and it didn't win because VHS got enough steam under it, and the inferior product actually ended up being the one that we adopted, at least for a few years, till that got thrown into the bin as well. And I think we're in danger of making the same mistake between electric-powered vehicles, and by vehicles I'm now talking about the larger vehicles, cars and above, especially heavy commercial vehicles and buses. We're now in danger of making the same mistake when comparing electric vehicles and hydrogen-powered vehicles. I know hydrogen power is later in development than electric is, but it is superior technology in a whole host of different ways that if we are not careful about ensuring that that opportunity is taken when it does become available, we will honestly lose out. Now, members around this table may or may not be aware, we talk about fuel and the availability of fuel, and we all see what fuel prices are at the moment as far as petrol is concerned. But when we look at petrol and the use of oil around the world, I don't think it's well recognized. I'm confident it's not known by members around this table when we actually have the maximum amount of oil which is going to be pumped out of the ground to be used across the planet. And the reason I'm confident that no one around this table knows it is that no one knows it. We have estimates, the so-called peak oil, the time when it's estimated that the greatest amount of oil is going to be taken out of the ground. And there are estimates that it could be as late as 2040 when that will happen, and there are estimates that it might have happened in 2017. And when you have the experts making comments like that, you really know that we don't really know where we are at all. The one thing which is absolutely certain is we will continue to need to use petrol, will continue to need to use oil for a significant part of our fuel requirements, whether they be directly in terms of cars and vehicles or even in terms of power stations. We will need to use oil for longer maybe than many people would want to, but that is just a matter of fact. And we have to be very careful that we don't indulge in the gesture politics of saying, oh, we're going to do this as quickly as we possibly can, let's bring it forward by another year, another 2 years, another 3 years, and actually end up with unrealistic targets. So that's what I would ask that we bear in mind, but also keep that space open for the better technology of hydrogen. Leave electric power for electric bikes and things like that, which it's much more suitable for.
I will come back to Emma, but Councillor Schuyler and then Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Chair. First off, hydrogen vehicles are electric vehicles. The difference is the battery. And it's not really a problem of finding enough fuel. It's a problem of finding enough atmosphere to dump the CO2. And obviously, this is what's pushing our drive. What I would like to know here, obviously, the Highways Authority is the county, so we're very interested in this particular program and changing what we do in terms of producing CO2. I think I would ask that the CPCA now establish adequate resource and both internally and to support the CCC to rapidly develop the strategy into a cohesive set of deliverables. And this means procurement, mapping potential locations, that sort of thing. It's about implementation at this particular point. And on that point, we put some charging stations in Abbey, and whatever we do going forward, we have to not do that again. They dumped them in the middle of the pavement, took up enormous amount of space. We need a standard that we can roll out across the county. And again, this is going to take some resource to deliver what we all know we need to do. Thank you.
Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you, Mayor. Oh, that one is working. Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. I don't disagree with Chris's point or to think about rural provision, because otherwise, if we're not careful, what will happen is for alternative fuels, but thinking especially about EV, that it will become a city-orientated thing. That is the danger. So I think Chris is right to raise that as a question. But let's not forget, I couldn't find it in here, and maybe Emma has it on the radar. So there is a private sector initiative going on every day. So if we take South Cambridgeshire at the moment, BP have just applied for planning permission to convert half of the regular fuel pumping at one of my stations to be electric. And that's going to happen in the next 6 months. Shell have also installed, and again in a rural area, Shell have installed 350 kilowatt chargers just at 4 Wentways. So part of the solution to what Chris is talking about is to really engage with the private sector, which is not costing us anything, to see where the gaps are and encourage BP, Shell, all the other energy companies to help us in our efforts, especially for rural areas. Thank you.
I will come back to Emma to answer that, but thanks for the prompt, because I was just going to do it. If you have done what I have done, if you ever looked at the constitution of the Combined Authority, it is within the gift of the mayoralty and the Combined Authority to look at working with the private sector to actually get that buy-in and installation of EV charging. Now, that has already been written to our, I can't remember when we wrote, was it to Grant Chaps again? in the past, and we're still following that through. That's been done in the background. So it's a very important point to note. Emma, do you want to come back on this in a few points?
Yeah, so just to pick up, I guess, a few of the points about making sure the rural areas aren't sort of forgotten. The whole point of the electric vehicle implementation working group is to work with all the councils to make sure everyone's represented. And what we're keen to do is get a way forward that works for everyone, that we don't just focus on this area can have this area can have that. And then actually we want it to work across the CPC area and actually further afield, as we were saying, trips come in and out as well. What we plan to do is pull together a couple of page document from this electric vehicle implementation working group and bring it back to this committee, and then look to maybe draw down funds to then take on the mapping, have the resource and really drive it forwards and go towards the levy funding that we can then progress electric charging. And to take on the hydrogen point, it's noted, and I'll make sure we sort of look into that further and take it on as part of the alternative fuel strategy.
There's a few more comments to come, and then we'll move on. Councillor Thornborough.
Yes, I welcome this report as well. In Cambridge City, we're working with private sector to deliver, I think, 700 EV charge points in the car parks over the next 5 to 7 years. So we're hoping to get 177 in by the end of this financial year, but it is constrained on the grid capacity. We're also working hard to provide EV community cars, and that's being constrained on availability of electric cars at the moment. So, but we're all heading in the right direction. I've learnt recently that Mid Suffolk have converted their entire fleet to use hydro-treated vegetable oil, HVO, and they said that until recently, it was an investment they've made, and until recently, actually, it was more expensive than they're running the diesel fleet. But now with the cost of fuel, it's actually more cost effective. So that's something I hadn't heard about. That districts may be interested in counties in that sort of alternative. Thanks.
Yep. Yeah. There's also the possibility of obviously HVO being used for domestic heating as well in the future, but that's another thing. Sorry, Laura was going to ask a question and then come back.
Yes, on the topic of rural residents, I'm curious in the consultation if you have a plan to target rural residents in receiving the consultation feedback. And also, I noticed in the report, section 2.6, it's mentioned that the aim is to support decarbonization aims of local authorities that have declared climate emergencies. And I would hope we would extend that to local authorities that might not have declared climate emergencies as well, rather than limiting it. There's an emphasis here in some of your analysis on knowledge sharing between districts. And I'm wondering how the climate working group might play a part in that, where you already have representatives from different districts and different agencies speaking together on climate issues. The steering group that you mentioned, it's not clear to me, is that an officer steering group or an elected member steering group? That would be helpful to know. And then there's an action plan included in the report, and it indicates CPCA opening up tenders for EV charging infrastructure. It appears towards 2024, and I think it would be really helpful to make sure that our local authorities are very aware of those timescales in order to avoid duplication. So we're talking about implementing charging by the local councils, and if the combined authority is looking at doing that within such a short time period, it would be a shame to duplicate the expense. But also, finally, I am quite concerned about the lack of conversation here with the national grid, because that in the end will be the limiting factor for all of our ambition for electric car charging, is the ability of the national grid to cope with it. Sorry, I give you quite a few questions.
There was quite a lot of points there. We go to Emma on this, and then finally we'll do a final question from Councillor Bovingdon.
Yeah, I agree with your points. In terms of the working group, at the moment, it's just officer, it's just something we're sort of setting up. So all your comments about sort of getting the climate committee involved, happy to take on all help and advice, shall I say, to sort of steer this forwards so that it works for the whole of the combined authority area. Like I said, at the moment, we're just sort of talking to officers and setting it up, but yeah, the invites can be extended, and I guess the more the merrier, that we can get it all working for the whole CPCA area is what we're trying to do. Like you said, the rural areas and the towns, and sort of trying to tie it up. If areas are doing their own, we want to sort of make it work for their area and to take it all around. And in terms of National Grid, I can take that on and sort of start those communications as well as we move forwards.
Okay, I'm just going to have one final question for Councillor Bovingdon.
Thank you, Mayor. It's more of a sort of point of information than a question. Having had the pleasure of spending an hour with the Chief Executive at the British Grand Prix of one of the Formula One teams, they are moving quite quickly away from electric on the basis of synthetic fuels, which actually is a more sustainable and more carbon-friendly policy. On the basis that electric hasn't yet proven to be carbon friendly with the actual manufacture of it. Plus the fact that we were discussing at length the benefits to the rural communities, and he said it's very unlikely that you're going to get a joined up service in rural areas. It works very well in the cities. So, I think we need to be very careful that we pursue central government's headlong surge for electric only, and look at alternatives. Yes, there's hydrogen, etc., but it does seem that biofuels, sustainable fuels, synthetic fuels, is actually probably a lot more longer term example of what we should be looking at. So just a point really to consider.
Yeah, I'm happy to take. I'm happy to take away all the points from today, and like you said, it's sort of a learning curve for everyone going forwards, and helpful points happy to take on and build, and maybe we need to update the name from the sort of electric vehicle implementation working group to so that it encompasses everything.
Yep. Okay. The report recommendations were to note the progress on the EAAFS, East Anglian Alternative Fuel Strategy, and B, to recommend that the Combined Authority Board approve a 6-week public consultation on the East Anglia Alternative Fuel Strategy. I'm going to go to the vote. Those in favour? Okay, we'll go for unanimous. Thank you. So we can now, you can step down, Emma. Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work on this, which is into active travel for Cambridgeshire. And I'm now going to ask Anna Graham to introduce this report.
Good morning. This paper is to seek approval from the Combined Authority Board to draw down funding for the completion of a programme of active travel measures in Cambridgeshire. In July 2020, the government announced a second round of funding for from the Active Travel Fund. Tranche 2 was for the implementation of long-term measures to benefit walking and cycling. The Council, working with Greater Cambridgeshire Partnership and District Councils, compiled a list of active travel measures. The list of active travel measures was assessed against the government criteria, and consultation was carried out to create a short list of interventions. Whilst government granted funding for the programme in 2021, a cost review has demonstrated